Good morning, I'm Captain LeCraw. I will be briefing the mission command of General Norman Schwarzkopf during Operations Desert Storm and Desert Shield. This is my agenda. Excuse me, this brief is also unclassified. Introduction. So, who is General Schwarzkopf? That is not him. That's Chris Farley. That's General Schwarzkopf during an SNL brief or SNL skit. I highly recommend you watch it. Just can pull up the video because it just doesn't work. That is General Schwarzkopf. General Norman Schwarzkopf, Storm Norman Schwarzkopf, was the coalition commander of the Allied forces during Operations Desert Storm and Desert Shield. He commissioned as an infantry officer, served in Vietnam during 2 tours. Got some pretty negative experiences there, but a lot of those experiences what shaped him to be the awesome commander that he was. And eventually became the CENTCOM commander in 1988, and then that followed up to the UN appointing him as the commander-in-chief of the coalition forces during Operation Desert Storm and Desert Shield. So what were Desert Storm and Desert Shield? Shield was the UN response to the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. The main goal was to defend Saudi Arabia from the Iraqi forces advancing any further. And then Operation Desert Storm was the follow-up to Desert Shield. It was the assault on Kuwait to liberate it, and then the follow-on assault through Iraq to finish off the Iraqi forces, forcing them to surrender, which ended up happening in about 3 days. So why did Iraq invade Kuwait? There are multiple reasons, but in general, it was that Iraq felt threatened and mistreated by the neighboring countries as well as the U.S. and the UN. The main problem they had was Kuwait. Kuwait was a big rival in oil. They were both part of OPEC, and Iraq claimed that Kuwait was overproducing, producing over the quota that OPEC agreed on. And also, Kuwait was drilling in some Iraqi oil fields. Additionally, Iraq had some issues with the Arab League, who was kind of like the EU for the Middle East, a collection of Arab nations. Iraq was already in debt from the Iraq-Iran war a couple of years ago. And now the Arab League was saying that they needed to pay some debts from some neighboring countries, which of course I was pretty unfair. And also, they were suspicious of U.S. and UN involvement in the Middle East. The UN already condemned them for some human rights violations that Iraq had, which was pretty much true, but UN condemned them, and then U.S. also convinced the UN to stop some support that they were providing to Iraq. So overall, after all these things, they decided we've had enough, we're going to invade Kuwait. The UN response was to set some sanctions against Iraq, naval blockade, and eventually all that led to Desert Shield and then Desert Storm. So, what did Schwarzkopf do? Which command principles did he use to affect the outcome of Desert Storm and Desert Shield? First thing he did, most importantly, was provide clear commander's intent. He did this right from the start. Schwarzkopf was very good at giving clear task and purpose. Commander's intent is all about task and purpose. This is what I need, and this is why. One example I found was during his briefs to all subordinate commanders and allied commanders. He gave several main tasks and said, here's what these tasks are going to accomplish. So for example, task 1, air superior, purpose, to allow the ground forces freedom of maneuver. Task 2, assault for Kuwait, purpose, liberate Kuwait and provide that naval access. Task 3, the ground assault, the infamous left hook around the western side of Iraq. The purpose of that was destroy the retreating Iraqi army. One quote that I found that I really liked, that was just not only motivating, was a perfect example of this is my intent, was this. He said, during that brief, he said, finally, all you tankers, listen to this. We need to destroy, not attack, not damage, not surround. I want you to destroy the Republican Guard. When you're done with them, I don't want them to be an effective fighting force anymore. I don't want them to exist as a military organization. Very clear, concise. This is what I need to have for tankers. Take care of it. He was also made his intent clear about using the U.S. strengths against the Iraqi weaknesses. The main strength, of course, being our technological advantage. Our superior air power, superior ground power allowed us to execute the assault quickly and effectively and kill efficiently. So how's he going to ensure his intent was met? He builds cohesive teams through mutual trust, the second critical principle of mission command. He had to trust, or trust goes both ways, up and down. So he had to trust both his superiors, his peers, allied commanders, and also his subordinate commanders. So first, starting off with subordinates, or superiors, he had to trust specifically General Colin Powell, Secretary of Defense Cheney, and President Bush to give him the additional forces he needed. That was one big concern he had before the assault happened, is he didn't think he had enough people. He didn't trust that the superiors would provide him with the people that he needed. Additionally, he had to build the respect and the trust with his allied commanders, specifically British, French, and Saudi commanders. At first, they were all kind of hesitant of him. They thought he was rude, brutish, aggressive. Turned out they eventually came to trust him and respect him. And this helps General Schwarzkopf effectively give them orders and they would carry them out, trusting that these were the right orders to execute. And then finally, he trusted his subordinates to effectively carry out the tasks that they got. These tasks, of course, being the different assaults around Iraq. So once he built that trust with his allied and subordinate commanders, that allowed them to exercise discipline and initiative. I think the best example of this is the assault through Kuwait. This was done primarily by the Marines and the the Arab Joint Task Force. So, one quote that I found during that same brief to all these subordinate commanders was, this was directed toward the Marine general. He said, "The objective is to tie up Saddam's forces and eventually encircle Kuwait. I leave it to Walt Boomer, the Marine general, to figure out how he wants to do that." That statement is just a perfect example of, hey commander, this is what I need you to do. You can carry it out however you need, but I need you to complete this objective. And then now that Marine commander was free to do whatever he needed to do in the way that he found best to do. He also put the Saudi General Khalid, in charge of all the different Arab nations, the Joint Arab Task Force. And this allowed him, instead of micromanaging all these different nations, he had one commander to exercise that initiative and execute the intent of General Schwarzkopf. And then finally, this one other example, this speaks to me as a past legislation. Before all this happened, the deployment operations in Savannah was just a logistical nightmare. All these different supplies and forces coming from 1,000 different directions. They were breaking all these different regulations of Coast Guard and Homeland Security and whatnot. Schwarzkopf told the guy in charge, Major General McCaffrey, "Look, I don't care about these regulations. I just need you to get this done and do it as efficiently as possible." And that freedom that he gave Major General McCaffrey allowed him to execute that task efficiently. And then finally, one more thing Schwarzkopf was great at is accepting period risk. The primary example of this is the risk of initially holding out the attack, the Operation Desert Storm. As I said before, initially they did not have the forces that Schwarzkopf thought was required to assault through Kuwait and Iraq. And he risked not attacking when he thought it best to attack. But again, he used that trust to, he trusted his superiors to eventually provide him with those necessary forces, which eventually allowed him to assault through. Also, as he was planning the assault that he possibly would have had to do with those inferior numbers, he did his best to plan around minimizing casualties. One quote from the French general is that he seemed like a good man with a big heart. We often talked about the need to avoid casualties. So, although he accepted risk, he did so while minimizing casualties as best as possible. So what are the effect that all these mission command principles had on the battle? Well, the obvious effect is how quickly the battle was won. It was a extremely decisive victory, sometimes said the quickest and best victory in American history. The battle was over in, again, less than 3 days. And there are also minimal friendly casualties. So how does all this apply? How can we use this today? Basically, as long as we use our mission command principles in all facets of our leadership, then we should be able to be as successful as General Schwarzkopf was. Also, we need to prioritize certain principles because sometimes one principle is more important in certain situations than others. Overall, conclusion is, if we apply these principles and memorize ADRP 6-0, we can be as effective as this awesome man right here. Any questions? That concludes my